Racist officer pepper sprays black teen. Not knowing his father is the police captain. A teenager's horrifying encounter with a cop takes a surprising turn when his father's identity comes to light. And if you cherish your family and love stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and avoid 10 years of bad luck. The streets of downtown Chicago shimmer under the amber glow of streetlights, a typical Wednesday evening in autumn. Malik Thompson, an 18-year-old with dreams bigger than the city's skyline, walks along Monroe Street with measured steps. His worn leather backpack contains his most prized possession, a notebook filled with lyrics and musical compositions. The weight of his saxophone case in his right hand provides a familiar comfort as he makes his way home from jazz practice at the community center. Through his headphones, John Coltrane's Giant Steps plays at a modest volume, allowing him to remain aware of his surroundings while staying connected to the music that drives his ambitions. Malik isn't just listening. He's studying every note, every progression, mentally recording the patterns that he'll later try to recreate during his practice sessions. His acceptance letter to the city's prestigious music program sits unopened in his back pocket, news he's saving to share with his father over dinner. The neighborhood around him is familiar territory. He's walked these streets countless times, nodding to Mr. Williams closing up his barbershop, watching Mrs. Rodriguez watering the flowers outside her restaurant. Tonight, however, something feels different. The air carries an unusual tension, like the moment before a thunderstorm breaks. Officer James Morrison's patrol car slides silently alongside the curb, its headlights off. Morrison has been on edge all evening, having responded to 3 false alarms in this area over the past week. He sees Malik tall, black, hoodie-clad, and makes a split-second decision. The car door opens with a sharp crack. "Stop right there. Hands where I can see them." Morrison's voice cuts through the evening air like a blade. Malik, initially lost in Coltrane's saxophone solo, takes a moment to register the command. He slowly removes his headphones, confusion evident on his face. "Sir, is something wrong?" Malik's voice remains steady, just as his father taught him. "Keep calm, stay respectful, make no sudden movements." The lessons replay in his head like a well-worn tape. Morrison advances, his hand already resting on his utility belt. "I said hands up. What's in the case?" His flashlight beam cuts harsh shadows across Malik's face, temporarily blinding him. "It's just my saxophone, officer. I'm coming home from practice. I can show you." Malik begins to lower his case, moving with deliberate slowness. "Don't move." Morrison's voice rises an octave. "Step away from the case." The situation escalates in seconds. Morrison draws his pepper spray, interpreting Malik's attempt to comply as defiance. Passers-by begin to slow their pace, phones appearing in hands like flowers blooming in fast motion. Mrs. Rodriguez steps out of her restaurant, her face a mask of concern. Mr. Williams pauses in locking his shop's door, his keys dangling forgotten in his hand. "Officer, please." Malik's voice cracks slightly. "I haven't done anything wrong. My father is Dash." The words catch in his throat as Morrison releases a burst of pepper spray directly into his face. The effect is immediate and devastating. Malik drops to his knees, his saxophone case clattering to the sidewalk. His eyes burn with an intensity that makes him forget everything else. The music, the acceptance letter, even his father's careful instructions. All he knows is pain and confusion. His screams echo off the building facades, drawing more attention. Phones continue recording as Morrison stands over him, still shouting commands that Malik can barely hear through his own distress. The growing crowd of witnesses creates a sea around the scene, their murmurs of disapproval growing louder with each passing moment. What none of them know, not Morrison, not the gathering crowd, not even Malik himself, is that this moment will catalyze a chain of events that will shake their community to its core. The real story is just beginning, as sirens in the distance signal the approach of someone who will transform this seemingly routine case of police overreach into something far more significant. Inside his patrol car across town, Captain John Carter's radio crackles with activity. He's finishing paperwork from an earlier domestic disturbance when the dispatcher's voice cuts through his concentration. "All units, we have a situation developing on Monroe Street near Thompson Community Center. Officer requesting backup, crowd gathering. Carter's hand freezes over his report. The community center, that's where Malik practices. A father's intuition, honed by years of both policing and parenting, sends a chill down his spine. He doesn't wait for the full dispatch, immediately grabbing his keys and starting his vehicle. The drive feels endless. Every red light is an eternity. Carter's mind races through possibilities. Malik should be heading home around this time. He's called his son twice, but the calls go straight to voicemail. His fingers drum against the steering wheel, a nervous habit he's never managed to break. 20 years on the force, and nothing prepares you for the moment your professional and personal worlds might collide. As he turns onto Monroe Street, the scene unfolds like a nightmare in slow motion. A crowd has gathered, their phones raised like digital torches in the growing darkness. Through gaps in the assembled bodies, Carter sees someone kneeling on the ground, obviously in distress. A familiar saxophone case lies on its side nearby. Carter's cruiser screeches to a halt. He's out of the vehicle before it fully stops, his captain's badge catching the streetlight as he moves. The crowd parts instinctively at his approach, recognizing authority in his bearing even before they see his uniform. What he finds stops him cold. Malik, his son, is on his knees, face contorted in pain, tears and mucus streaming down his face from the pepper spray. Officer Morrison stands over him, still maintaining an aggressive stance, seemingly oblivious to the fact that his suspect is a teenager clearly coming from music practice. "Officer, stand down." Carter's voice carries the weight of command and barely contained fury. Morrison's head snaps around, recognition and then uncertainty crossing his face as he realizes who has arrived. "Captain Carter, sir, I was just " Morrison begins, but Carter cuts him off with a raised hand. He's already kneeling beside Malik, who's trying to speak through his pain. "Dad." Malik's voice is rough, barely recognizable. I was just walking." Carter pulls out his handkerchief, gently wiping his son's face while shooting a glare at Morrison that could melt steel. "I'm here, son. Don't try to talk." To Morrison, his voice taking on an edge that makes the younger officer step back. "What exactly warranted this level of force, Officer Morrison?" Morrison shifts his weight, suddenly less certain of his actions. "Sir, I observed a suspicious individual with a large case, possibly a weapon. When he reached for a weapon?" Carter's voice rises slightly. "This is my son coming home from jazz practice. The same practice he attends every Wednesday, carrying the same instrument case, walking the same route home." Each word falls like a hammer blow. The crowd has grown larger, their murmurs more insistent. Someone calls out, "That's how they treat our kids." Another voice adds, "Even when their fathers are cops." Carter feels the situation balancing on a knife's edge. His training tells him to take control of the scene, but his paternal instincts scream for justice. He sees the conflict mirrored in Malik's Reddendy. Yes, the same struggle between respect for authority and the raw pain of injustice. Rising slowly, Carter faces Morrison fully. "Officer, you will return to your vehicle and wait for me there. We're going to have a very long discussion about proper procedure and reasonable suspicion." His voice drops lower, meant only for Morrison's ears. "And you better pray there's more to this story than what I'm seeing right now." The tension between the two officers crackles like static electricity. Morrison opens his mouth to respond, then thinks better of it, nodding stiffly before retreating to his patrol car. The crowd watches his departure with a mixture of satisfaction and lingering anger. Carter turns back to Malik, who's now sitting up straighter, trying to regain his composure despite the lingering effects of the pepper spray. The saxophone case lies forgotten, a silent witness to the evening's events. Neither father nor son yet realizes that this moment will force them both to confront questions about loyalty, justice, and what it means to wear the badge in a world where such incidents are far too common. The scene on Monroe Street transforms from a police incident into something larger, more significant. Phones continue recording, their small red lights dotting the darkness like fireflies. Social media updates ping out into the digital sphere. Captain's son pepper sprayed by fellow officer #police brutality #justice for Malik. Among the gathering crowd, Reverend Marcus Thomas pushes his way forward. At 65, the pastor of First Baptist Church has been a pillar of the community for 3 decades, witnessing too many similar incidents. His presence commands immediate attention, his silver hair and well-worn clerical collar lending gravity to the moment. Brothers and sisters, his deep voice rolls out over the assembled crowd. Let us remember that how we react in this moment will define our community's response. He moves to stand between the crowd and where Carter tends to Malik, becoming both buffer and bridge. The crowd swells as people emerge from nearby businesses and homes. Mrs. Rodriguez hands Malik a bottle of water to rinse his eyes, while Mr. Williams offers his clean handkerchief. What started as a handful of witnesses has grown to nearly 100 people, their collective anger palpable in the evening air. Reverend Thomas begins to speak again, this time with the measured cadence of Sunday sermon. Tonight, we witness again the burden our children bear. A young man, carrying nothing more dangerous than a saxophone and dreams, treated like a criminal in his own neighborhood. His words catch the crowd's attention, phones now turning to capture his impromptu speech. Malik, still struggling with the pepper spray's effects, listens to the pastor's words. The scene around him feels surreal. His father, the career police officer, standing protective over him while wearing the same uniform as the man who just assaulted him. The contradiction isn't lost on the young musician. But look closer, Reverend Thomas continues, gesturing to Captain Carter. Here stands a father who serves our community, watching his own son fall victim to the very system he represents. This is not just about one incident, one officer, or one young man. This is about a system that needs healing. The crowd responds with murmurs of agreement. Someone starts a chant. No justice, no peace. It ripples through the gathering, gaining strength with each repetition. Malik feels the rhythm of it, different from his jazz beats, but carrying its own powerful melody. Through stinging eyes, Malik watches his father's face, seeing the internal struggle playing out. Captain Carter maintains his professional demeanor, but his jaw clenches tight enough to see the muscles working beneath his skin. 20 years of service to the force weighs against 18 years of raising a black son in America. Reverend Thomas approaches Malik directly, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. Young man, how are you feeling? His voice carries genuine concern, but also something else, a challenge, perhaps, or an invitation. I'm okay, Reverend. Malik manages his voice hoarse, just trying to understand why. The acceptance letter in his back pocket feels heavy now, laden with new meaning. The pastor nods sagely, speaking just loud enough for those nearby to hear. Sometimes, son, understanding comes not from the why, but from what we do next. Your father wears that uniform to protect and serve. Now you have a choice about how to serve too. These words strike Malik deeply. He glances again at his father, seeing not just the captain, but the man who taught him to play saxophone, who encouraged his dreams of music school, who gave him the talk about how to behave during police encounters, advice that didn't prevent tonight's incident. The crowd continues to grow, news crews beginning to arrive at the edges. Their cameras add to the forest of recording devices, turning this corner of Monroe Street into an impromptu stage where a drama about family, duty, and justice plays out under the streetlights. Reverend Thomas raises his voice once more. Let this moment be different. Let this be where change begins, not just another incident to be forgotten when the news cycles move on. Captain Carter stands here not just as an officer, but as a father. Malik sits here not just as a victim, but as a young man with a voice that needs to be heard. The words hang in the air, heavy with possibility. Malik feels the weight of expectations settling on his shoulders, mixing with the lingering burn of pepper spray and the growing realization that his life has shifted irrevocably. His music, his relationship with his father, his view of the world. Everything seems different now, viewed through tears that aren't entirely from the pepper spray. The tension in the air thickens as the crowd's demands grow more insistent. Take a stand, Captain, someone shouts from the back. Which side are you on? Calls another. Captain Carter stands at the epicenter of this growing storm, his uniform now feeling like both armor and target. With decades of experience handling volatile situations, Carter knows this moment requires careful navigation. He steps forward, raising his hands for attention, but the crowd's energy has taken on a life of its own. They want more than just procedural justice. They demand a symbolic gesture from a man caught between two worlds. "Listen," Carter begins, his voice carrying the authority of his rank, but tempered with something more personal. "What happened here tonight was wrong. As a captain, I assure you there will be a full investigation." He pauses, feeling the weight of every word. But as a father, his voice catches slightly, and in that small crack, the crowd sees his humanity. Malik watches this unfold from his position on the curb, where a paramedic now checks his vital signs. The burning in his eyes has subsided somewhat, but a different kind of discomfort grows in his chest. He sees his father attempting to walk an impossible line between his oath to the force and his duty to his son, between procedural loyalty and moral justice. The crowd surges forward, not aggressively, but with purpose. Signs appear as if by magic. Justice for Malik and stop police brutality held high above heads. Smartphones continue recording, live streaming this moment to an ever-growing virtual audience. Social media explodes with hashtags and shares, turning their local incident into a national conversation. "Captain," Reverend Thomas speaks again, his voice carrying over the murmurs. "Your community needs more than promises of investigation. They need to know that those sworn to protect them understand their pain." The pastor's words land like stones in still water, rippling through the assembled crowd. Malik feels torn. His entire life, he's watched his father navigate the complexities of being both black and blue, a black man in a blue uniform. He's seen the pride his father takes in his work, the genuine desire to serve and protect. But now, watching him stand there, Malik realizes he needs something more from his father than just professional assurances. The young musician starts to rise, his legs shaky, but his resolve strengthening. The crowd notices, voices quieting as he takes a tentative step toward his father. The paramedic reaches to stop him, but Malik gently waves him off. This moment feels crucial, like the split second before a key change in jazz. Everything hanging on what comes next. "Dad," Malik's voice carries in the sudden quiet, still rough from the pepper spray, but clear enough. He doesn't get to finish his thought before more voices join in, encouraging him to speak up, to tell his story. Carter turns to his son, and for a moment, their eyes meet. In that look passes years of understanding, of unspoken fears, of pride and protection. The captain sees not just his son, but every young black man who's ever faced similar treatment. The weight of this realization shows in his stance, in the slight slump of his shoulders, usually held military straight. Reverend Thomas moves closer to Malik, placing a supportive hand on his shoulder. "Sometimes silence is not neutral. It's complicity," the pastor says, his words meant for both father and son. "Your voice matters, young man. Your truth matters." The crowd watches this tableau. Father in uniform, son still bearing the marks of police aggression, and the community's spiritual leader bridging the gap between them. News cameras were capturing every nuance of this moment that seems to crystallize larger societal struggles into one family's personal crisis. Malik feels the burning in his eyes return, but this time it's not from pepper spray. He thinks about his music, about how jazz was born from pain but transformed into something beautiful and powerful. He thinks about the acceptance letter still in his pocket, about all his dreams and aspirations, and about how quickly they could have been derailed by one officer's prejudice. The crowd waits, breaths held, as this father and son stand at a crossroads. Their personal drama has become public, their choices now carrying weight far beyond their family. The next words spoken, the next actions taken, will ripple out into their community and beyond, becoming part of a larger narrative about justice, family, and the possibility of change. Hours later, in the quiet of Maya's living room, Malik sits at her upright piano, his fingers hovering over the keys without playing. Maya Thompson, his girlfriend of 2 years and fellow musician, watches him from her perch on the worn leather couch. The events of the evening play across multiple news channels on her laptop, their story already becoming headline material. "You should write about it," Maya says softly, breaking the contemplative silence. Her braids cascade over her shoulders as she leans forward, dark eyes intense with concern and determination. "Music has always been your way of processing things." Malik's hands finally drop to the keys, playing a minor chord that hangs in the air. The pepper spray's effects have mostly subsided, leaving only a lingering irritation and something deeper, an emotional burn that no amount of water could wash away. "How do I write about this without hurting my dad?" he asks, his voice barely above a whisper. Maya moves to sit beside him on the piano bench, her shoulder touching his in silent support. "Maybe that's not the right question," she suggests. "Maybe the question is, how do you not write about it?" The piano becomes Malik's confessor as his fingers begin to move, finding a melody that mirrors his turmoil. The progression is dark, complex jazz with an edge of urban anger. His father's face keeps appearing in his mind, the proud smile when Malik mastered a difficult saxophone solo, the serious expression during their LKS about how to handle police encounters, the conflicted look tonight as he stood between his son and his fellow officer. "I have all these feelings," Malik says, the music growing more intense under his fingers. "Anger at Morrison, confusion about my dad's position, fear about what could have happened." His playing shifts to a more introspective pattern. "But I also understand what Dad deals with every day. He joined the force to make things better from the inside." Maya reaches over and plays a complementary melody in a higher register, the notes interweaving with his darker tones. "Sometimes love means telling hard truths," she says. "Your music has always been honest. Why stop now?" Malik's playing pauses as he pulls the acceptance letter from his pocket, now slightly crumpled from the evening's events. The prestigious Berklee College of Music logo seems to mock him, a symbol of dreams that could have been shattered by one officer's prejudice. "You know what's ironic?" he says, setting the letter on the piano's music stand. "I was going to tell Dad about this tonight. Celebrate with him. Now!" His fingers find the keys again, but the melody has changed, becoming something more questioning, searching. Maya takes the letter, smoothing it carefully. "Maybe this is exactly why you need to write about it. You're not just Malik the musician anymore. Tonight made you something else too." The weight of her words settles over him. The music flowing from his fingers begins to transform, incorporating elements of gospel, blues, and contemporary jazz. The musical heritage of protest and pain, hope and resilience. His father had introduced him to these styles, teaching him about their historical significance while teaching him to play. "I keep thinking about what the Reverend said," Malik muses, the music continuing to evolve under his touch. "About how silence isn't neutral. Dad spent years trying to change things quietly from inside the system. Maybe it's time for a louder approach." Maya nods, adding her own musical phrases to his growing composition. "Your dad chose his way of fighting. Now you need to choose yours." Standing abruptly, Malik moves to the window, looking out at the city lights. His reflection shows a young man different from the one who walked home from practice earlier. Changed not just by the pepper spray and the confrontation, but by the realization of what his role might need to be. "I need some air," he says suddenly. "Need to clear my head before I can write this." He turns to Maya, seeing understanding in her eyes. "This song, it needs to be more than just my story. It needs to speak for everyone who's ever been stopped, questioned, feared for no reason." Maya rises, embracing him briefly. "Go, find your clarity." "But Malik." She waits until he meets her gaze. "Remember that your father's uniform doesn't define him any more than what happened tonight defines you. The truth you need to tell lies somewhere in between." As Malik heads for the door, the unfinished melody hangs in the air behind him, waiting to be completed. The acceptance letter remains on the piano, a reminder of both opportunity and obligation. His path forward isn't clear yet, but the music beginning to form in his mind carries both pain and possibility, much like the city streets he's about to walk. The city at night feels different to Malik now, each streetlight casting shadows that seem more ominous than before. As he walks through familiar neighborhoods, he notices a small gathering in Harrison Park, the regular meeting spot of local activists who call themselves Voice of Change. He recognizes some faces from school and the community center. They're huddled around phones and tablets, watching footage from earlier that evening. His own face appears on several screens, the moment of his confrontation with Officer Morrison playing out in endless loops on social media. "Hey, isn't that him?" someone whispers. The group turns. D. Malik finds himself facing Sarah Chun, a well-known community organizer who's been leading discussions about police reform for the past 2 years. Her expression is both sympathetic and determined. "Malik Thompson," she says, not a question, but a recognition. "We were just discussing what happened. Would you like to join us?" The invitation carries weight beyond simple courtesy. The circle opens to welcome him, and Malik finds himself sitting on a park bench surrounded by young activists. Their energy is different from the angry crowd earlier, more focused, strategic, determined. Sarah pulls up statistics on her tablet. Incidents of police misconduct, racial profiling data, successful reform initiatives from other cities. "Your situation is unique," Sarah explains, her voice measured and clear. "A captain's son, a promising musician, no criminal record. You put a face on what we've been fighting against. The system can't dismiss you as easily as they dismiss others." Marcus, a pre-law student Malik knows from the community center, chimes in. "We've been gathering testimonies, building cases for reform. But your story, man, it hits different. The video's already got hundreds of thousands of views. People are paying attention." The weight of responsibility settles deeper on Malik's shoulders. He thinks about his father, about all the times they've discussed change from within versus pressure from without. "I never wanted to be his symbol," he says quietly. "None of us did," responds Tanya, another activist. "But sometimes the moment chooses you." She shows him social media responses to his incident, messages of support, shared experiences, calls for action. Your father's position makes this even more powerful. It shows how systemic the problem is. Even a captain's son isn't immune. As they talk, Malik begins to see his experience through a wider lens. His music has always been about expression, about telling stories through melody and rhythm. But now he's part of a larger narrative, one that's been playing out in cities across the country. "We're organizing a peaceful protest next week," Sarah mentions. "Nothing aggressive, just a march for accountability and reform. Having you there, maybe performing." She leaves the suggestion hanging in the air. The group shares their stories, times they've been profiled, stopped, questioned. Each account adds another layer to Malik's understanding. His father had always taught him about navigating these situations, but hearing these perspectives helps him realize that surviving the system isn't enough. It needs to change. "Your father," Marcus says carefully, "he's respected in the department. If he stood with us." Malik feels the familiar tension between loyalty and justice. He's trying to change things his way, he defends, but even as he says it, he wonders if that's enough anymore. Sarah places a gentle hand on his arm. Sometimes the most powerful voices are those caught between worlds. You don't have to choose between supporting your father and standing for what's right. Maybe you can do both. The night grows deeper as they continue talking, sharing strategies, hopes, and fears. Malik finds himself taking notes. Not music this time, but ideas for action, for change. His phone buzzes occasionally with messages from his father, each one left unanswered as he tries to sort through his thoughts. "Whatever you decide," Sarah says as the meeting winds down, "know that you're not alone in this. Your music, your voice, your story, they're powerful tools. Use them wisely." As Malik stands to leave, he feels different, more purposeful. The confusion hasn't entirely cleared, but it's being replaced by something else: determination. He needs to talk to his father, but first he needs to be clear about where he stands. Back home, Malik finds his father sitting in their dimly lit kitchen, still in uniform, staring at a cold cup of coffee. The wall clock reads 2:37 a.m. Captain Cart looks up as Malik enters, the worry lines on his face deepening with relief at his son's return. "I've been calling," Carter says quietly, his usual authoritative tone replaced by something more vulnerable. "Was starting to think about putting out an APB." The weak attempt at humor falls flat between them. Malik pulls out the chair across from his father, the scrape of wood against tile floor cutting through the tension. I needed time to think, he says, placing his phone face down on the table. The screen still shows dozens of missed calls and messages. Carter nods, pushing his untouched coffee aside. I spent the last few hours dealing with internal affairs. Morrison's been suspended pending investigation. He pauses, running a hand over his face. But that's not enough, is it? No, Dad, it's not. Malik's voice is firm but gentle. I met with some activists tonight. They're organizing, gathering stories, pushing for real change. This isn't just about me or Officer Morrison. Carter's jaw tightens, but he remains silent, listening. Malik continues, all those talks we had about how to behave during police stops, all your warnings, they didn't protect me tonight. Your badge didn't protect me. I joined the force to make a difference, Carter says, his voice heavy with frustration. 20 years working my way up, trying to change things from the inside. But tonight, watching that officer, one of my officers, treat my son like that. He trails off, emotion choking his words. Malik leans forward. You taught me that music is about truth, about speaking from the heart. Well, this is my truth, Dad. I'm tired of being afraid. Tired of watching friends get profiled. Tired of seeing good cops like you struggle to fix a broken system from within. Carter stands abruptly, pacing the kitchen. You think I don't understand? Every day, I walk this line, black man in a blue uniform. I've fought for diversity in hiring, pushed for better training, advocated for community policing. But change takes time. We don't have time, Malik counters, his voice rising slightly. Tonight it was pepper spray. Next time, he can't finish the sentence, but they both know what he means. The names of other encounters gone wrong hang unspoken between them. Finally, Carter stops pacing, bracing his hands on the kitchen counter. The activists you met with, what do they want from you? They're planning a peaceful protest. They want me to perform, to share my story. Malik pauses, then adds, they want you there too, Dad. Not just as Captain Carter, but as my father. The kitchen falls silent except for the soft ticking of the clock. Carter turns to face his son, really seeing him, not as the little boy he taught to play saxophone, but as a young man finding his voice. Taking a public stand could affect my position in the department, Carter says slowly. My ability to make changes from within. Malik stands, moving to join his father at the counter. Maybe it's time for changes to come from both sides. You inside the system, me and others pushing from outside. Different approaches, same goal. Carter looks at his son, pride mixing with concern. You know this path won't be easy. Once you become a voice for change, there's no going back. I know, Malik says, pulling out the wrinkled acceptance letter from his pocket. But I got into Berkeley, Dad. Tonight could have ended that dream before it began. How many other dreams get cut short because people like Morrison see threats instead of talent? Carter takes the letter, emotion flooding his face as he reads it. Pride, fear, and determination war in his expression. Berkeley, son, this is amazing. He looks up, meeting Malik's eyes. You're right. Something has to change. So you'll support me? Malik asks, the question carrying weight beyond the upcoming protest. Carter pulls his son into a tight embrace. I may not agree with every method, every approach, he says quietly. But I'm your fat. For first, always. We'll find a way to make change happen together. As they separate, both men sense a shift in their relationship. They're no longer just father and son, but allies in a larger cause. The kitchen clock continues its steady rhythm, marking time in a world that suddenly feels full of both challenge and possibility. The public square buzzes with anticipation as volunteers set up a modest stage for the afternoon's protest concert. Malik stands behind the makeshift curtain, saxophone in hand, watching the growing crowd through gaps in the fabric. What started as a local incident has grown into something larger. Social media has done its work, drawing people from across the city. Sarah Chun and her team have organized everything meticulously. Signs reading music for change and justice harmony mixed with more direct messages about police reform. Security volunteers in bright vests maintain order, while medical stations stand ready. a necessary precaution given recent tensions. Backstage, Maya helps Malik tune his saxophone, her fingers brushing his hand reassuringly. "Your father?" she asks quietly, noting his frequent glances toward the police presence at the edges of the square. "He said he'd come," Malik responds, adjusting his reed. "But I haven't seen him yet." The morning's headlines flash through his mind. Police Captain's son leads reform rally. The media already spinning narratives before a single note has been played. Reverend Thomas approaches, his clerical collar stark against his dark suit. "The crowd's larger than we expected," he says, his deep voice carrying both approval and caution. "News vans are setting up. You ready for this, son?" Malik nods, though his heart pounds against his ribs. The piece he's prepared isn't just music. It's his statement, his truth set to melody. Hours spent in Maya's living room, transforming pain and hope into something that could reach beyond words. Sarah joins them, tablet in hand. Social media is exploding. Live streams are already running. "We got people tuning in from across the country." She pauses, checking another alert. And Malik, Officer Morrison's dashcam footage just leaked. It's trending. The news sends a ripple through the backstage area. The footage would show everything: the baseless stop, the escalation, the pepper spray. More fuel for the fire already burning. 5 minutes, a stagehand calls out. Malik rises, saxophone hanging from its strap, heavy with purpose. Through the curtain, he can hear the crowd growing restless, their chants for justice mixing with scattered applause. Maya squeezes his hand one last time before taking her place at the keyboard. Reverend Thomas steps out to address the crowd, his voice carrying across the square. "We gather today not in anger, but in hope. Not in division, but in unity. And now, a young man will share his story not through words, but through the universal language of music." Malik closes his eyes, centering himself. The composition in his head weaves together elements of jazz, gospel, and contemporary protest music, a bridge between traditions, just as he hopes to bridge communities. The curtain pulls back. Sunlight floods the stage. Malik opens his eyes to face the sea of faces. Phones raised, cameras rolling, expectations heavy in the air. For a moment, he freezes, overwhelmed by the magnitude of the moment. Then he sees him. Captain John Carter stands at the back of the crowd in civilian clothes, his badge for once absent from his chest. Their eyes meet across the distance, and Malik sees his father give a slight nod. Permission, approval, support all conveyed in that simple gesture. Malik raises his saxophone to his lips. The first note cuts through the afternoon air, clear and strong. Maya's keyboard joins in, laying down the foundation. The piece begins gently, almost traditionally, before building into something more challenging, more questioning. The crowd falls silent, caught in the story his music tells. The familiar comfort of walking home, the sudden intrusion of fear, the burning of pepper spray, the confusion of seeing justice and injustice wear the same uniform. Each phrase carries emotion that words alone couldn't convey. As the music swells, Malik sees phones lowering, people closing their eyes, letting themselves feel what he's expressing. Even the police officers at the perimeter seem affected, their rigid poses softening slightly. The composition builds toward its climax, a series of ascending runs that mirror the rising of voices, the demand for change. But instead of ending in anger, it transforms into something hopeful, a melody that suggests possibility, reconciliation, progress. The final notes of Malik's performance hover in the air, followed by a moment of profound silence. Then, like a wave breaking, the crowd erupts in applause and cheers. Tears stream down faces, and strangers embrace, moved by the raw emotion of his musical testimony. But the moment of unity is shattered by a familiar voice cutting through the applause. "Nice show, kid. Really tugging at those heartstrings, aren't you?" Officer Morrison pushes through the crowd, still wearing his uniform despite his suspension, his face flushed with what might be anger or embarrassment. The crowd tenses immediately. Security volunteers move forward, but Morrison waves them off. "I've got a right to be here," he says loudly. Since everyone's so interested in telling stories, maybe I should tell mine. About how hard it is to police these streets, about split-second decisions. Malik stands at the microphone, saxophone still in hand, watching this disruption unfold. The crowd's energy shifts dangerously, murmurs of anger replacing the previous harmony. Maya steps closer to him, protectively. "Officer Morrison," Malik begins, keeping his voice steady. "This isn't about Dash, shut up." Morrison snaps, moving closer to the stage. "You think one incident makes you some kind of spokesman? You don't know what we deal with out there. Your father knows. Ask him about the real world, not your musical fantasy of it." The mention of Captain Carter seems to summon him. The crowd parts as Carter makes his way forward, still in civilian clothes, but carrying all the authority of his rank. His presence commands attention, silencing both Morrison and the increasingly agitated crowd. "That's enough, James," Carter says, his voice carrying across the square. "You're suspended. Being here in uniform is a direct violation of orders." Morrison turns to face his superior officer, defiance written across his features. "Captain, you're letting your son turn this into a circus. These people don't understand what we face every day. You've forgotten what it's like on the streets." "No, Morrison," Carter responds, moving to stand between the officer and the stage. "I haven't forgotten anything. What I remember is taking this job to protect and serve all of the community. What I saw that night wasn't protection, it was prejudice. And it ends now." The confrontation draws media attention, cameras swiveling to capture this unexpected drama. Carter continues, his voice growing stronger. "I've spent 20 years trying to change things quietly from inside the system. But watching my own son get assaulted by one of my officers." He pauses, emotion creeping into his voice. "That showed me we need both kinds of change, from within and without." Morrison's face reddens further. "So you're choosing them over us? Over the badge?" "I'm choosing justice," Carter replies firmly. "The same justice I swore to uphold. The same justice that requires us to face our biases and do better." He turns to address the crowd directly. "What happened to my son happens too often to too many sons and daughters. It has to stop, and it stops with us, with officers willing to stand up and say this is wrong." The crowd erupts in support, but Morrison makes one last desperate move, stepping toward Malik with unclear intentions. Before security can react, Carter's hand clamps down on Morrison's shoulder, spinning him around. "You're done here," Carter says, his voice deadly quiet. "Turn in your badge and gun tomorrow morning." The department doesn't need officers who can't see past their own prejudices. The moment hangs in perfect tension. Father defending son, captain confronting officer, right facing wrong in the bright afternoon sun. Phones capture every second, live streaming this unexpected climax to audiences far beyond the square. Morrison finally backs down, his shoulders slumping in defeat. As security escorts him away, the crowd's cheers mix with appreciative applause for Captain Carter's stand. Malik watches his father, seeing him somehow larger than life, yet more humanly vulnerable than ever before. 3 weeks later, the incident has catalyzed changes beyond what anyone expected. The shaky phone footage of Malik's pepper spraying, combined with Morrison's dashcam video and the dramatic confrontation at the protest, has become a focal point for national discussions about police reform. Inside the precinct's main conference room, Captain Carter leads a newly formed community relations task force. Representatives from various neighborhoods sit alongside officers, working together on new training protocols and accountability measures. The walls display statistics and proposals, but at the center is a large photo of Malik performing at the protest, a reminder of why they're there. The internal investigation into the Morrison incident is complete, Carter announces to the assembled media outside the precinct. But more importantly, we're implementing comprehensive changes in training, oversight, and community engagement. This isn't just about one incident or one officer. It's about systematic change. Meanwhile, Malik sits in Berklee College of Music's main auditorium, his saxophone case by his side. The Dean of Music stands at the podium, addressing a packed house. Mr. Thompson's composition Justice in Blue Minor has become more than just music. It's become a soundtrack for change. We're proud to announce a full scholarship program for young musicians from underserved communities, named in honor of this powerful piece. The viral video of Malik's protest performance has garnered millions of views. Music critics praise its sophisticated blend of jazz traditions with contemporary social commentary. But more importantly, it's being played at reform rallies across the country, its melodic message of pain and hope resonating far beyond its origins. Back home, Malik and his father sit in their living room, watching news coverage of Morrison's official dismissal from the force. The former officer faces additional civil rights charges, his dash cam footage providing irrefutable evidence of misconduct. "Your music did this," Carter says quietly, gesturing at the TV. "It made people feel what statistics and reports never could." Malik shakes his head. "We did this together, Dad. Your stand meant as much as my song." He pauses, fingers unconsciously moving through saxophone fingerings. "How's the department taking it?" "Change isn't easy," Carter admits. Some officers resist the new measures. Others are stepping up, embracing the chance to do better. The younger ones especially. They see what happened with you, and they want to be part of the solution. Maya arrives with fresh news. Their local success has sparked similar initiatives in other cities. Police departments are reaching out to artists and musicians, creating dialogue through cultural exchange. The protest piece that Malik composed is being taught in music schools as an example of art's power to drive social change. "I never thought my acceptance letter would lead to all this," Malik muses, watching footage of another city's police community music program. "One moment nearly ended everything, but instead it started Everett." "Hing," Maya finishes, squeezing his hand. "Sometimes the worst moments birth the best changes." Carter stands, adjusting his captain's uniform. "I've got a community meeting to get to. New training protocols to discuss." He pauses at the door. "You know, son, I used to worry that being both black and blue meant living in conflict. But you showed me they're just different parts of the same truth." As his father leaves, Malik picks up his saxophone, playing a few soft notes of his now famous composition. The melody has evolved, just as they have, still carrying the pain of that night, but now wrapped in layers of hope, progress, and possibility. The final news segment shows split-screen images. Captain Carter implementing new police protocols, Malik performing at Berkeley, community forums in progress, and officer training sessions incorporating cultural awareness. The headline reads, "Local incident sparks national change. The power of music and justice." Maya sits at the piano, joining Malik's melody with harmonious chords. Through the window, they can see their city, unchanged yet fundamentally different, moving toward a future they helped create, one note and one reform at a time. "Ready for your first day of classes tomorrow?" she asks, their music weaving together like the threads of their shared experience. Malik lowers his saxophone, looking at the acceptance letter now framed on the wall alongside news clippings and performance photos. "Ready," he says. "There's still so much music to write, so many changes to make." Outside, the city continues its endless rhythm, but now with a new melody playing underneath. One of hope, justice, and the possibility of change, composed by a young musician who dared to play his truth into the world.